The series begins by showing a talented ballet dancer named Lee Yeon-seo who had accomplished so much in her career and was well on her way to becoming a famous ballet dancer. But one day, everything changed for Yeon-seo when a terrible accident took away her ability to see. This incident shattered her dream of becoming a famous ballet dancer, and she has been traumatized ever since. Despite her loss, Yeon-seo is still the sole heir to her wealthy family's fortune, which puts her in danger from both outsiders and even her own relatives. She is known for her quick temper, violent tendencies, and cruel treatment of others. One day, after tripping over a chair, Yeon-seo angrily scolded her maids and demanded that they experience the same pain as she did. She doesn't hesitate to fire her maids for even the smallest mistakes. After losing both of her parents, Yeon-seo is left with only two confidants. The first is her chief maid, Jung Yoo-mi, who is a strong and loyal woman. The second is Jo Seung-hwan, Yeon-seo's personal secretary, who always stands by her side despite her difficult personality. On the other hand, there lived a charming and optimistic angel named Kim Dan. His greatest dream was to ascend to the heavens and join his fellow divine beings. Sadly, he had yet to earn his wings because of a mischievous habit of ridiculing humans who committed crimes, despite not being assigned to do so. One fateful day, while wandering around Earth, Kim Dan stumbled upon Yeon-seo, who was being harassed by two rowdy teenagers. Instinctively, he felt the urge to help her, but before he could intervene, Yeon-seo, who was visually impaired, overpowered her attackers with ease. Intrigued by her abilities, Kim Dan followed Yeon-seo to a nearby park, only to find out that she was aware of his presence. This was peculiar since humans weren't supposed to perceive angels like him. However, Yeon-seo, known for her fiery temper, mistook Kim Dan for a peeping Tom, which caused him immense humiliation. Adding to the confusion, Yeon-seo could hear Kim Dan's voice, which was even more perplexing to him. He panicked and fled the scene, leaving behind his handkerchief, which she discovered. Then, she immediately called her friend Yoo-mi, warning her of a pervert lurking nearby. Soon after, the scene moves to Yeon-seo's company. At that time, things were not going well for her, who was the owner of a company. Her health was not stable, and so her aunt named Choi Young-ja took over the company temporarily. But it turned out Young-ja had a hidden agenda. She wanted to take over the company entirely, replacing Yeon-seo as the owner. Yeon-seo's secretary, Mr. Jo, suspected this and decided to investigate Young-ja's involvement in Yeon-seo's eye transplant surgery, which was always being hindered. Meanwhile, Kim Dan was still pondering over his strange encounter with Yeon-seo, where she could feel his presence. While walking, he saw a car hit a cat, and the driver didn't care and drove away. Kim Dan, who couldn't stand seeing the poor animal suffering, took the cat to his senior angel, Mr. Hu. At the meeting, Mr. Hu warned Kim Dan not to interfere in human affairs as it could lead to punishment from the gods. But Kim Dan was too naive and didn't think his actions would have consequences. He even asked his seniors if humans could sense the presence of angels. However, Mr. Hu cautioned Kim Dan against even touching a human, as it could cause him to vanish into thin air like dust. However, at that time Kim Dan disregarded his senior's warning and continued to think about his missing handkerchief, which was a precious object to him because it symbolized his identity as an angel. Then, he went back to the place where he met Yeon-seo, hoping to find his lost handkerchief. To his surprise, Yeon-seo had found it and was holding onto it tightly in her sleep. At that time, Kim Dan tried to retrieve his handkerchief, but Yeon-seo woke up suddenly, causing him to panic. However, he soon realized that she couldn't sense his presence because she was holding onto the handkerchief so tightly. Because of that, he had to wait until Yeon-seo fell back asleep to try again. Unfortunately, even after waiting all night, Kim Dan couldn't retrieve his handkerchief. He had no choice but to follow Yeon-seo to the ballet culture festival in his office. People were talking about Yeon-seo's unexpected appearance at the festival, but she didn't seem to care about their opinions. Even when she overheard an insult in the restroom, she didn't let it bother her. Soon after, Yeon-seo went on to give a speech at the event, accompanied by Mr. Jo. Her words were powerful and emotional, causing Young-ja to feel humiliated and cornered. At that moment, Young-ja was seething with frustration as she listened to the speech, feeling like Yeon-seo didn't appreciate her efforts. After the event, she confronted Yeon-seo, but was met with a shocking revelation that Yeon-seo's aunt was rotten to the core and had even been happy when Yeon-seo became blind. Meanwhile, Kim Dan had managed to sneakily retrieve Yeon-seo's handkerchief while she was dancing alone in the ballet practice room. Then, on the way home with Mr. Jo, Yeon-seo was ordered to undergo surgery to achieve her dream of becoming a famous ballerina. But in a fit of anger, she lashed out at Mr. Jo, who was used to her temperamental behavior. He reminded her that she needed to be strong in the face of people trying to bring her down, just as she had with Young-ja. But Yeon-seo's partner was rude to Mr. Jo, warning him not to interfere or risk losing his job. Shortly afterwards, Mr. Jo realized that something was wrong with the car they were driving because someone had sabotaged it. Suddenly, the car careened out of control and crashed into the road divider, nearly falling off the bridge. Because of that, Mr. Jo was knocked unconscious. However, Yeon-seo, despite her serious injuries, managed to stay conscious and attempted to seek help from passersby. Blind and helpless, she didn't realize that the car had careened to the other end of the bridge. At the same place, Kim Don prayed for Yeon-seo's safety despite knowing that her fate was uncertain. Surprisingly, Yeon-seo could sense his presence and hear his prayers. Kim Don, who initially didn't want to get involved in that accident, suddenly remembered his past experiences when he saw the car crash. Against the rules, he used his powers to save Yeon-seo and even touched her cheek, which was a serious offense for an angel. As a result, Kim Don was immediately punished for breaking the rules and was taken away by Hu Sr. He was given a chance to redeem himself, though. He had to complete his last mission as an angel, which was to become a human and find a woman who could love him for who he was within 100 days. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo was saved by Kim Don and a kind stranger who took her to the hospital. Sadly, Mr. Jo, the driver of the car that crashed, didn't make it. However, he had donated his eyes to Yeon-seo, which gave her the gift of sight. Although grateful for the gift, she was heartbroken by the loss of Mr. Jo. As for Kim Don, who had become human for the first time, was thrilled to experience new things. When he discovered that Yeon-seo was the woman he had to make fall in love with him, he was disappointed. He knew that Yeon-seo was not a kind person, and he thought that making her love him was impossible. However, he had no choice but to complete his mission as he had committed a grave sin. On the other hand, Yeon-seo was still mourning the loss of Mr. Jo, and her friend Yumi tried to encourage her to move on. However, she was stubborn and told Yumi that she hadn't asked Mr. Jo to sacrifice himself for her. This upset Yumi, who blamed Yeon-seo for Mr. Jo's death. As Yeon-seo was leaving, her body suddenly became weak, and she couldn't walk. After being examined by a doctor, they discovered that she was experiencing psychological trauma, which had caused her to become temporarily paralyzed. Meanwhile, in another part of town, there was a kind man named Ji Kong-woo. He was a ballet instructor and had helped Yeon-seo once during an accident. Now, he was the new managing director of the ballet show at Yeon-seo's company. Kong-woo had big plans for the ballet team and wanted Yeon-seo to replace the main dancer, Gu Mi-na. But Yeon-ja didn't want Yeon-seo to become the main dancer and opposed Kong-woo's decision. Despite the opposition, he was determined to make Yeon-seo the main dancer even though Yeon-seo didn't know about his plan yet. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo and Yumi were searching for a new personal secretary to replace Mr. Jo, but they couldn't find anyone suitable. Then, suddenly, Kim Don applied for the job. However, Yeon-seo rejected him at first, but he insulted her, which made her angry and chase after him. In her anger, Yeon-seo stood up without using any tools, which was a big surprise because she had been paralyzed before. Yumi later told Kim Don that he had been accepted as Yeon-seo's secretary and he started living in her house. His new job was to learn all of Yeon-seo's habits and schedules. The next day, Kim Don began his new task of serving and assisting Yeon-seo. Despite having no martial arts training, he had to learn and master it. He also witnessed firsthand how Yeon-seo treated her staff disrespectfully. One day, Yeon-seo discovered her yard covered in leaves and became furious. She questioned each of the staff members, accusing them of being incompetent. Feeling sorry for them, Kim Don asked the maids to leave and continue their work elsewhere. However, that angered Yeon-seo, who ordered Kim Don to clean the yard alone. Shortly after, Kim Don continued to sweep the yard, even as night fell and the rain poured down. Suddenly, his angel wings appeared, causing him to panic. At the same time, Yeon-seo called out for him. While searching for him, she stumbled upon broken glass scattered on the floor, triggering a traumatic memory from her past and causing her to panic. To make matters worse, a decorative lamp fell from the ceiling, nearly hitting her. Fortunately, Kim Don used his wings to shield her from harm and carried her to safety. When Yeon-seo regained consciousness, she mistakenly believed that Kim Don was a perverted man dressed as an angel and blamed him for the accident. As the sun rose on a new day, Kim Don felt more and more discouraged about winning the heart of the heartless Yeon-seo. Despite this, when Yeon-seo learned that Kim Don had been hurt while saving her, she reached out to him and helped to heal his wound. Little did she know that as an angel, he had the power to heal himself. As the days passed, Yeon-seo found herself drawn to Kim Don's company, secretly hoping that he would visit her. One day, as she waited eagerly in her room, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart leapt with joy at the thought of his arrival, but to her disappointment, it was Yumi who stood on the other side. There, Yumi was curious about what had happened the previous night, while Kim Don was determined to uncover the cause of the decorative lamp that had fallen and almost harmed Yeon-seo. Then, he spoke with the head of the house security and the light workers, but Yeon-seo thought his efforts were weak. Shortly after, she fiercely interrogated the workers, bombarding them with questions until the chairman of the house security resigned. Other employees followed suit, leaving Yumi confused by Yeon-seo's rude behavior. Yeon-seo then demanded that Yumi call the CCTV officer to review the footage. Hearing that, Kim Don panicked, fearful that his angel wings would be exposed. Fortunately, the footage malfunctioned the moment his wings appeared, keeping his identity safe. And the security guard responsible for the incident turned out to be Mr. Hu had orchestrated the situation to protect Kim Don. When asked about his wings, Mr. Hu claimed it was due to the rain. Shortly after, Kang-woo arrived with a detective to investigate the incident. Despite Yeon-seo's objections, he persisted in pursuing the investigation, suspecting that Kim Don was involved in the incident. There, the detective searched the crime scene but found no clues as Kim Don had already cleaned up his scattered wing feathers to avoid detection. Yeon-seo then asked Kim Don to bring his car, but he confessed that he couldn't drive and Kang-woo ended up driving instead. When they arrived at their destination, Yeon-seo visited her parents' graves, and Kim Don overheard her heartbreaking story of constantly being targeted by those who sought to bring her down. Then, Kim Don promised to help Yeon-seo overcome her struggles and achieve her dreams. These words made her uneasy, and as the rain began to fall again, Kim Don panicked at the thought of exposing his identity as an angel. He quickly said goodbye to Yeon-seo and went to retrieve an umbrella from the car. While Yeon-seo waited for Kim Don, Kang-woo revealed his desire for Yeon-seo to return to ballet dancing. He said he had always liked Yeon-seo and promised to help her in any way he could. As they drove back to her house, a broken tree trunk almost caused a terrible accident. Yeon-seo was reminded of the terrible crash she had with Mr. Jo, and suddenly she remembered something important. She realized that Kang-woo was the one who saved her life during the accident and handed over her lost earrings, which confirmed her belief. But unknown to her, it was actually Kim Don who had saved her. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo's former head of security, who was actually working for Yeon-ja, admitted that he was responsible for spying on and harming Yeon-seo. Despite Kang-woo's efforts, Yeon-seo refused his invitation to return to ballet. At that time, he was surprised when he discovered that Kim Don had no history or background, and he wondered who he really was. Meanwhile, Kim Don was determined to win Yeon-seo's heart and carefully calculated the time he had left to do so. The next day, Kim Don woke up to a shocking sight. Yeon-seo was crying hysterically because her dog had been poisoned. It turned out that the dog ate the cake he received the night before from Kang-woo. The poor pup had to go to the vet clinic for treatment. At that moment, Kim Don was confused as to why Yeon-seo was so attached to her furry friend. Then, she explained that the dog was her last remaining family member. Afterward, he comforted her, assuring her that she wasn't alone because he and Yumi would always be there for her. Meanwhile, Yeon-ja had sneaked into Yeon-seo's house using a key provided by the former head of house security. She was searching for something when Yeon-seo caught her. Yeon-seo was angry to see her aunt and her family there, pretending to celebrate her healing. She knew their true intentions and kicked them out immediately. Kim Don, however, thought that Yeon-seo had gone too far and got into a fight with her. They threw sponge cakes at each other and pulled each other's hair until he decided to quit his job as her secretary. Later that night, Yumi convinced Kim Don to return to work with Yeon-seo. He initially refused, but Yumi managed to get him drunk, and he eventually gave in. It turned out that Yeon-seo missed him too. In his drunken state, Kim Don apologized to Yeon-seo and even bandaged the wound on her hand that was caused by their fight earlier. In a moment of vulnerability, Kim Don spoke to Yeon-seo, urging her to have faith in him so she could return to her former self, radiating like the sun. These words ignited a spark within Yeon-seo, and she found herself drawn to him, even wanting to kiss him despite his drunken state. But alas, before their lips could meet, he succumbed to the effects of the alcohol and passed out. The next morning, Kim Don awoke with a pounding headache and the weight of shame on his shoulders. He struggled to recall the events of the previous night, but the memory of his behavior filled him with embarrassment. As if that wasn't enough, the police arrived and took him into custody, leaving him feeling disoriented and confused. Then, he insisted that he was just a mere employee of the household, but the police informed him that Yeon-seo, the owner of the house, had ordered his arrest. As Kim Don grappled with the chaos that had suddenly taken over his life, he couldn't help but wonder what had caused Yeon-seo's sudden change of heart towards him. He knew deep down that he had done nothing wrong, but he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that lingered within him. Shortly after being taken into custody, Kim Don pleaded with the police to allow him a moment to speak with Yeon-seo. He felt that he did not deserve to be treated this way and hoped to clear up any misunderstandings. When Yeon-seo arrived, Kim Don tried to explain himself, but she accused him of being a fraud. She revealed that the night before, when he was drunk, Kim Don had told her about his mission to approach her. This caused her to believe that someone had sent him to spy on her. Kim Don was speechless at first, but then admitted that he had indeed met Yeon-seo before. However, he explained that everything he had done was for her sake. When Yeon-seo asked who had sent him on this mission, Kim Don innocently replied that it was someone above. She assumed he meant his boss, while Kim Don meant a god, so their misunderstanding only grew worse. This ultimately led to him being taken to the police station. Feeling disappointed and betrayed, Yeon-seo decided to clean up Kim Don's belongings in her house. However, Yumi urged her not to jump to conclusions and fire Kim Don without any evidence. She argued that Kim Don was actually in love with Yeon-seo and everything he had done was for her benefit. However, Yeon-seo had lost all faith in Kim Don and ordered Yumi to pack up his belongings. She wanted nothing more to do with him. Meanwhile, Kim Don left the police station and went to the church where he met with Mr. Hu. He asked if he could stay there for the night, but Mr. Hu refused because Kim Don had failed his mission. However, Mr. Hu gave Kim Don another chance, this time with a different objective. He was only required to make Yeon-seo believe in love and find her true destiny. Kim Don was thrilled and believed that destiny was Kang-woo. Hungry and penniless, he asked Mr. Hu for some money to buy food, but Mr. Hu left without giving him any. Meanwhile, Kang-woo was busy preparing a ballet show project when he received a call from Yeon-ja. The investors were questioning his decision to make Yeon-seo the main dancer because of her bad reputation. It turns out that after Yeon-seo kicked Yeon-ja and her family out of her house, Yeon-ja's sister, Ru-na, secretly shared the incident on social media, tarnishing Yeon-seo's image even further. The video that went viral left investors feeling unsure about Kang-woo's plans for the show. They started doubting that his show would attract a large audience. Even though Yeon-seo used to be the most talented ballet dancer and people used to wait eagerly for her performances, her reputation had taken a hit in the eyes of the media. Despite this, Kang-woo refused to give up on his plan. He believed that Yeon-seo's bad image would make it easier for them to satisfy the audience as their expectations wouldn't be too high. He was hopeful that if they managed to grab the media's attention, their company would make a fortune. However, Ru-na thought differently. She told Kang-woo not to push Yeon-seo into the spotlight, even though the investors still had faith in his plan. Ru-na argued that Yeon-seo wasn't ready yet and hadn't even accepted the offer to become the main ballet dancer. Kang-woo, on the other hand, was stubborn and believed that Yeon-seo would agree to perform again. Meanwhile, Nina, a member of the ballet team, was sent to Yeon-seo's house by Kang-woo to get closer to her. Even though she was scared of Yeon-seo's bad reputation, she had to follow Kang-woo's orders because she had feelings for him. When Nina arrived at Yeon-seo's house, she met Kim Don, who was trying to sneak in because he was hungry. When Yeon-seo showed up, they both screamed and ran away in fear. Later, Kim Don told Nina that he wanted to enter Yeon-seo's house because he had no money and was starving. She felt sorry for him and took him to a restaurant to buy him food. Unlike her mother and older sister, who were hostile towards Yeon-seo, Nina was a kind-hearted person who sympathized with Yeon-seo's situation. She even apologized to Kim Don on behalf of her family, explaining that he was fired because he went to Yeon-seo's house without permission. Meanwhile, at Yeon-seo's house, all the workers quit because they couldn't stand her annoying attitude. To make matters worse, Yeon-ja tells Yeon-seo that the board of directors and others agree to replace her as the owner of the company. They think Yeon-seo is unfit to lead the company because she needs an assistant just to walk. However, she refuses to give up and says she will prove she can do it. That night, Yeon-seo tries to walk without her cane but falls. She also tries to cook ramen but fails. Hungry and alone, she has no servants to help her. Luckily, Yumi brings a woman who wants to be her maid. Yeon-seo, with her cold attitude, refuses Yumi's offer because she recognizes the girl as the maid she had fired before. However, Yumi says that the maid can be trusted. She also reveals that the former head of house security, not Kim Don, was the person who tried to harm Yeon-seo before. Soon after Yumi learns the truth, she urges Yeon-seo to convince Kim Don to work with her again. At that time, Yeon-seo feigns indifference but secretly longs for Kim Don's return. The next day, she finds herself standing alone outside the church where Kim Don resides. With a trembling voice, Yeon-seo beseeches Kim Don to come back and be her personal secretary once again. Hearing that, Kim Don agrees, but only on the condition that she grants him 3 requests. At first, Yeon-seo is hesitant, fearing that Kim Don's demands may be inappropriate. However, he explains that his requests will actually benefit her. With no other choice, Yeon-seo agrees to his terms. With Kim Don by her side, Yeon-seo begins to conquer her fear of walking alone. She feels safe and protected when he's around, and even begins to develop feelings for him. Her heart beats faster every time she's close to him, and she feels more comfortable than ever before. At that time, Kim Don had a plan to bring Yeon-seo and Kang-woo together. His first condition was for Kang-woo to meet Yeon-seo at the temple. As luck would have it, he was already there, and they greeted each other. Kim Don had promised to help Kang-woo win Yeon-seo's heart. To make this happen, Kim Don secretly hid Yeon-seo's shoes and pretended to go out to look for them. This gave Kang-woo and Yeon-seo a chance to spend some time together. Before leaving, he asked Kang-woo to look after Yeon-seo, who was going to perform the lantern releasing ritual. Then, Kang-woo seized the opportunity and approached Yeon-seo. He convinced her to dance the ballet he had prepared, and they shared a sweet moment. He also advised her to have the courage to attend the board of directors meeting alone and prove that she was the rightful heir to the company. At that moment, Yeon-seo had been thinking about her feelings for Kim Don, even as she considered Kang-woo's offer. But in the end, she accepted Kang-woo's invitation to perform again. The next day, at the board of directors meeting held by Yeon-ja, Yeon-seo surprised everyone by showing up alone. There, she had planned to get rid of Yeon-seo, but now she was taken aback. After the meeting, Yeon-seo approached Kim Don and thanked him for giving her the courage to attend. She then asked him to cover his eyes, and she gave him a gift. She planned to kiss him on the cheek, but he turned his head, and their lips met by accident. Then, Yeon-seo pulled back, but Kim Don responded with a more intimate kiss. There, Kang-woo saw everything and was shocked. He watched in silence, feeling like a winged angel under the lights. As Kim Don and Yeon-seo were lost in their kiss, a sudden downpour interrupted their moment. He abruptly broke the kiss and fled from her presence, fearing that his angel wings would reappear and expose his true identity. Confused and emotional, Yeon-seo felt rejected by his hasty departure, unaware of his true intentions. The next day, things remained awkward between them as they met again. However, Kim Don acted as if nothing had happened and cheerfully greeted Yeon-seo, causing her to think he was a flirt who often toyed with people's emotions. In reality, he was still reeling from the intensity of their kiss. As Yeon-seo struggled to regain her ballet skills, painful memories from her past haunted her, causing her to stumble. Witnessing her distress, Kim Don offered to help, but her anger towards him caused her to reject his offer. Later, when Yeon-seo overheard Kim Don receiving a call from Nina, she grew jealous and demanded to know why Nina had called him. Despite Nina's innocent intention of giving Yeon-seo new ballet shoes, her jealousy took over and she insisted that Kim Don throw them away. Shortly after, Yeon-seo asked Kim Don to accompany her to practice ballet. But as they practiced, Kim Don grew nervous because of how close she was to him. Unknown to him, Kang-woo had seen them together and felt betrayed by Kim Don, who had promised to help him win Yeon-seo's heart. However, Kim Don had grown fond of Yeon-seo on his own accord. Then, Kang-woo confronted Kim Don and threatened to harm him if he continued to pursue Yeon-seo. Concerned for his safety, he sought advice from Mr. Hu about the consequences of an angel having feelings for a human. Soon after, Mr. Hu shared a story of an angel who had fallen in love with a human, just like Kang-woo had in the past. That person had chosen to give up their angelic identity to be with the woman they loved, who resembled Yeon-seo. Kang-woo's obsession with Yeon-seo was because he believed she was the reincarnation of the woman he had loved. Afterward, Kim Don asked what would happen if he were to do the same, and Mr. Hu warned him that he would be destroyed and all memories of him erased from existence. After Kim Don heard the explanation, he was taken aback and didn't know what to do. Yeon-seo put him to the test by asking if he truly loved her. Deep down, he had feelings for her and wanted to answer truthfully, but Mr. Hu's threat weighed heavily on his heart, forcing him to say no. The next day, Kim Don came up with a plan to set up a stage by the beach and invite Kang-woo to take Yeon-seo there. As they arrived, Yeon-seo recalled her past, performing her first ballet dance in front of a child who she believed was Kang-woo. Meanwhile, Kim Don watched from behind a hut, feeling a deep pain as he realized that Yeon-seo's past was repeating itself. Just as Kang-woo was about to confess his feelings, the hut where Kim Don was hiding collapsed, ruining the moment. Yeon-seo saw Kim Don and grew angry, feeling as if he was always following her despite her clear disapproval. Then, as the night settled in, memories of the past flooded Kim Don's mind once again. He couldn't help but think about Yeon-seo, but he knew he had to bury his feelings deep down and focus solely on being a professional secretary. To start with, he aimed to get his driver's license and be a reliable driver for Yeon-seo. Despite the numerous times he failed the driving test, he refused to give up. His determination stemmed from his desire to be of service to Yeon-seo. Meanwhile, Kang-woo's true identity was finally revealed. Like Kim Don, he too was an angel. At that time, Kang-woo visited his late girlfriend's grave and there he revealed his identity by displaying a handkerchief, which was his angelic symbol. His girlfriend bore a striking resemblance to Yeon-seo, which left him in a state of despair. It turned out that his girlfriend had died protecting him, and he was unable to end his own life due to the punishment he had received for disobeying the gods. Kang-woo's guilt was unbearable, and he had attempted to hurt himself several times. On the other hand, Kim Don receives orders from Yumi to take Yeon-seo to a party attended by company officials and investors. Yumi warns him to be vigilant as there might be someone plotting something against Yeon-seo. And it turns out that Yeon-ja is indeed plotting to harm Yeon-seo by spiking her drink with drugs. Her aim is to make Yeon-seo look crazy and unfit to lead the company so that she can take over as the leader. Despite Kim Don's efforts to thwart the plan, Runa manages to drug Yeon-seo's food, causing her to lose control and almost fall. Luckily, Kim Don saves her again. The next day, investors withdraw their support due to an incident in which Yeon-seo commits a crime. Despite this setback, Kang-woo remains determined to make her the main dancer on his ballet team, even without the support of sponsors. However, the rest of the ballet team refuses to follow Kang-woo's wishes and stops practicing altogether. It seems that Yeon-seo's troubles are far from over. At that moment, Nina, who has feelings for Kang-woo, becomes frustrated with Kang-woo's obsession with Yeon-seo. She feels unappreciated as Kang-woo never acknowledges her hard work and loyalty. Meanwhile, Kim Don investigates the drugging incident with Runa. However, Runa denies involvement despite Kim Don's suspicions. As Kim Don leaves Runa's office, he spots the man who drugged Yeon-seo in her office. Kim Don chases after him but fails to catch him. Kim Don realizes that the person who hired the man is a close relative of Yeon-seo, but he decides not to burden her with the news. Later, Yeon-ja visits Yeon-seo's house to demand her resignation from the company. Yeon-ja believes that if she resigns, the investors will return to the company. Kim Don becomes emotional and swears at Yeon-ja for causing Yeon-seo's suffering. He believes that bad deeds will come back to haunt those who commit them, causing endless regret. The next day, as the ballet show faced a crisis, Yeon-seo made a bold promise to do everything in her power to ensure it went ahead, even if it meant selling her own house. But at night, her frustration boiled over as she learned that someone had given Yumi drugs, causing her to lose control. At that moment, Yeon-seo turned to alcohol to soothe her anger, while Kim Don tried to comfort her. Kim Don sympathized with Yeon-seo's struggles and offered to be her only audience if she chose to give up on the show. As Yeon-seo became more intoxicated, she unknowingly revealed her true feelings for Kim Don, admitting that her unrequited love for him had been a source of great distress. Although he longed to reciprocate her feelings, he was reminded of a message from Mr. Hu and hesitated to confess his love. After carrying Yeon-seo to bed, Kim Don retreated to a nearby bridge to contemplate his sadness. The weight of his unspoken love for Yeon-seo weighed heavily on him, and he wondered if he had made the right decision in keeping his feelings to himself. Soon after, because Kang-woo was emotional, he pushed Kim Don to the side of the bridge, asking him why he dared to tell Yeon-seo to surrender. The argument grew intense, and both men ended up falling into the river. Kang-woo knew about Kim Don's conversation with Yeon-seo because he had secretly followed them. As they struggled in the water, Kim Don tried to help Kang-woo but ended up putting himself in danger. He almost drowned, but thankfully, he only suffered minor injuries to his hands. Despite everything that happened, he was worried about Kang-woo's condition. When Kim Don woke up, he immediately asked the medical team to find Kang-woo. He was relieved to hear that Kang-woo was okay and across the river. At the hospital, Kim Don was wondering if Kang-woo had overheard his conversation with Yeon-seo. To his surprise, Kang-woo appeared next to him, warning him not to tell Yeon-seo to give up her dream of becoming a ballet dancer. But Kim Don replied that he did it out of love for Yeon-seo, not wanting her to suffer from the pressure to become a dancer. He also warned Kang-woo not to force Yeon-seo or face the consequences. The next day, Yeon-seo was practicing ballet when Kim Don showed up to praise her hard work. Suddenly, Yumi arrived with a document of Yeon-seo's blood test. She advised Yeon-seo to show the results at the investors' meeting to prove that someone had given her medicine to make her lose control. However, Yeon-seo rejected Yumi's suggestion, wanting to prove that she didn't have a mental disorder. On their way to work, Kim Don took Yeon-seo to a bridge and offered his support for the upcoming meeting. He promised to stand by her, no matter what decision she made. There, Yeon-seo was moved by his words and fell even more in love with him. Soon after, at the meeting, it started like any other, but something was different about Yeon-seo. Usually, she was arrogant and rude, but this time she was polite and ethical. She even apologized for her behavior the day before. However, things quickly turned when Yeon-ja and one of the investors started cornering her. At that moment, Yeon-seo's true colors came out as she intimidated them back. She declared that she would gladly resign as the owner of the company if she failed to perform at the Grand Ballet Stage event. There, Yeon-ja was left speechless by Yeon-seo's bold and confident decision. Later, Yeon-seo discovered that the ballet team had stopped practicing because they disagreed with Kang-woo's plan to make himself the main dancer. Then, Yeon-seo asked Kang-woo to treat her like any other dancer and not prioritize himself. To convince the other dancers to cooperate, Yeon-seo and Kim Don went to a nursing home where the ballet team was doing charity work. However, the members who already disliked Yeon-seo became even more unpleasant. It was her first time doing charity work, and she found it challenging, but with Kim Don's support, she was able to enjoy the moment. On the second day of the charity activity, an old woman who was blind became anxious because her idol was missing. But soon, the old man she was looking for showed up. Unfortunately, they accidentally dropped a candle, causing a small fire that made everyone panic. The other ballet members blamed Yeon-seo for the incident and accused her of seeking sympathy from them. But she only wanted to establish a closer relationship with her fellow dancers. On the third day, Nina and her friends were surprised to see Yeon-seo and Kim Don at the nursing home early in the morning. There, Yeon-seo kindly helped a confused female patient learn how to use a cell phone to contact her husband. Shortly after, the old woman's husband apologized to Yeon-seo for the fire incident, admitting that it was his wife who had knocked over the candle. Hearing that, Nina and her friends felt sorry for accusing Yeon-seo of causing the problem. Soon after, Kang-woo arrived at Yeon-seo's request. However, he had no clue why she asked him to come. Yeon-seo then suggested holding a fair audition to find the main dancer for the Akbar ballet performance. At first, Kang-woo didn't agree, but he could see Yeon-seo's sincerity and eventually accepted her idea. But then, Nina, who had a strong desire to become the main dancer, learned about the audition and convinced her eccentric ballet teacher to train her. In the meantime, Kang-woo started following Kim Don secretly because he sensed something odd about him. Kim Don's hand, which was supposed to be injured, was now scar-free, and that raised Kang-woo's suspicion. While Kim Don was shopping to cook for Yeon-seo, he met Mr. Hu at the supermarket, who ordered him to submit a report and stop wasting time on unimportant things. Unbeknownst to them, Kang-woo saw it all and grew more suspicious of Kim Don's behavior. Then, Kang-woo decided to revisit the church where Mr. Hu lived and finally met him in person. But despite his efforts, Mr. Hu managed to dodge Kang-woo's suspicions about his true identity as an angel. Meanwhile, Kim-don was cooking for Yeon-seo, but he wasn't very skilled in the kitchen, and it ended up making a mess. At that time, Yeon-seo tried to help, but their inexperience only made things worse. Despite the kitchen disaster, they ended up having ramen for dinner that night, which created a fond memory for Yeon-seo. She found it hard to sleep because she kept thinking about the warm moment they shared. On the other hand, Kim-don had a recurring dream about a boy and a little girl. He asked his seniors about it, thinking it might be related to his past. But Mr. Hu changed the subject and took him to meet an old married couple who he claimed were angels. However, Mr. Hu wanted to eliminate the old woman's husband because he loved humans too much. This made Kim-don realize that if he were in that situation, Yeon-seo would be in danger. Meanwhile, at home, Yeon-seo think about growing old with Kim-don and her heart filled with happiness. So, when she woke up that morning, she was determined to make it a special day. She cooked up a delicious breakfast and waited for Kim-don's arrival. But when he finally showed up, he delivered some heartbreaking news that he was quitting his job and leaving her forever. Naturally, Yeon-seo was shocked by Kim-don's sudden decision and demanded an explanation. She knew that he had feelings for her, even if he denied it. But he insisted that he was lying before and that he was only trying to help Yeon-seo recover from a difficult time. Kim-don felt that his job was done now that Yeon-seo was feeling better. This revelation left Yeon-seo feeling hurt and used, as if she had been the butt of some cruel joke. She was so angry that she kicked Kim-don out and ordered him to pack his things. Even Yumi tried to talk Kim-don out of leaving, but his mind was made up. He couldn't bear to see Yeon-seo suffer as the old woman had suffered when her husband disappeared. So he left, hoping that he had made the right decision. Meanwhile, Kang-woo was still determined to uncover the truth about Kim-don. He returned to the church where Kim-don lived, despite Mr. Hu's attempts to keep them apart. Kang-woo barged in and searched for Kim-don, but instead found himself facing Mr. Hu. Kang-woo even tried to attack Mr. Hu with an iron, but to his surprise, the iron transformed into a beautiful flower. Unfazed by the strange occurrence, Kang-woo warned Mr. Hu not to underestimate him and asked him to tell God to stop interfering in human affairs. This left Mr. Hu wondering who Kang-woo really was. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo had started practicing ballet with the group, but without Kim-don by her side. Unfortunately, the other members of the group were mean to her and made her feel unwelcome. Despite this, Yeon-seo tried to remain patient with their behavior. However, things took a turn for the worse when Yeon-ja and Ru-na arrived, making Yeon-seo feel even more uncomfortable. There, Yeon-ja even asked Kang-woo not to judge the main dancer selection fairly. At that time, Yeon-seo was annoyed by Yeon-ja and Ru-na's behavior towards her, but she didn't want to give up. She suggested that everyone should not judge the main dancer selection, including Yeon-ja and Ru-na, since they were Ni-na's family. Afterward, Yeon-seo proposed that the dancers should choose who deserved to be the main dancer. During practice, Yeon-seo couldn't focus and kept thinking about the sweet moments she shared with Kim-don. Meanwhile, Kim-don was in a nursing home, keeping an old woman company after the loss of her husband. Later that night, Yeon-ja snuck into Ru-na's room, looking for something. However, Ru-na suddenly appeared and caught Yeon-ja in the act. It turned out that Yeon-ja had discovered that Ru-na was responsible for the accident that happened to Yeon-seo and Mr. Jo. To her surprise, she realized that Ru-na was the one who committed acts of violence and crime, not Yeon-ja. After knowing that, she was worried about Ru-na's psychopathic behavior and couldn't stop her out of fear that Ru-na would act even more recklessly. Meanwhile, as Yeon-seo finished her ballet practice, she couldn't help but think of Kim-don. Her longing for him was too strong to resist, so she decided to bid farewell to her friend Yumi and go find him. Then, she went straight to the church, where Mr. Hu warned her not to search for Kim-don again. He believed it was best for both of them to stay apart. But Yeon-seo's heart was too heavy with the memories of Kim-don. Then, she went to the spot where they first met and kept calling his name, hoping he would hear her. And he did. Shortly after, Kim-don came to her, but he refused to come back to her, no matter how much she begged. Finally, Yeon-seo understood that he had made up his mind, and she was the one who left him. Kim-don found solace in caring for an old woman he considered his own grandmother. Whenever he fell asleep, he would dream of a little boy with a little girl. Then, when Kim-don woke up, he discovered that the old woman he had been caring for had vanished from her bed. Fearing the worst, he frantically searched for her until he found her in the same spot where her husband had disappeared years ago. There, the old woman taught Kim-don a valuable lesson about love and happiness. She explained that being truly loved by someone sincere is the greatest joy in life, and though time may separate you, the moments spent together are worth it. She even revealed that she had known all along that her husband was an angel, just like Kim-don. After hearing that, Kim-don was no longer afraid to love or be loved by Yeon-seo. However, before returning to her, he felt the need to uncover the mystery of the boy who appeared in his dreams. Suddenly, he journeyed back to his past, where he stumbled upon a familiar house from his dreams. There, he remembered the abuse he suffered from his father and realized that the little girl he had dreamt of was actually Yeon-seo. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo was preparing for her grand ballet performance, Giselle. However, as she danced, she couldn't shake the image of Kim Don from her mind. In her longing, she even mistook Kang-woo for Kim Don and nearly kissed him before realizing her mistake. Overwhelmed with emotion, she asked for a break to regain her composure. Shortly after, Yumi proposed to Yeon-seo that they go on a trip down memory lane to help her move on from Kim Don. However, when they arrived, they were surprised to find Kim Don there too. Despite their awkward feelings after their recent separation, they greeted each other with silence. Yeon-seo had come to the place not for a vacation, but to find the boy who had always been with her in her childhood. Unfortunately, she had no idea where to start her search. Then, she asked a middle-aged woman about the boy's characteristics and finally received an answer. However, it was not what she wanted to hear because the boy was likely deceased. Feeling sad, Yeon-seo visited a place where she could reminisce about her memories with the boy. By coincidence, Kim Don was also there and he hugged Yeon-seo immediately. He knew that the boy she had been searching for was actually him, but he couldn't explain it to her. He simply wanted to comfort her. After paying her last respects to the boy, Yeon-seo begged Kim Don not to leave her alone. She had lost her parents, relatives, and now the boy she had been seeking. If he left, she would be completely alone. At that moment, Kim Don listened to Yeon-seo's request and told her that he had one more request to make. He asked her to give him some time to complete something important before they could be together. There, Yeon-seo was curious about what he had to do, but Kim Don didn't give her an answer. He only gave her his handkerchief and left. Meanwhile, Kang-woo, who had been watching the whole scene, approached Yeon-seo and hugged her. But Yeon-seo, who had promised to wait for Kim Don, rejected Kang-woo's hug and slapped him. Kang-woo refused to give up and told Yeon-seo not to waste her time on a man who always runs away. However, Yeon-seo stood her ground and warned him to stay out of her business with Kim Don. Despite her warning, Kang-woo vowed to keep fighting for her heart. The following day, Yeon-seo remembered her promise to Kim Don and tied the handkerchief he gave her to her bag. At work, she heard rumors that she was dating Kang-woo, which bothered her. Then, she told him to keep their professional and personal lives separate. Meanwhile, Yeon-ja ordered Runa to bribe the dancers to make sure Nina was chosen as the main dancer. Back to Yeon-seo. There, she was pouring her heart and soul into practicing for the upcoming ballet show. But as night fell, she couldn't help but wonder about her own feelings. So she turned to her friend Yumi for advice, pretending it was for someone else. Then, Yeon-seo asked what she should do if a man promised to come back, but only left behind an object as a guarantee. Yumi was quick to reply, saying that such a man was a liar. These words left Yeon-seo feeling even more confused and anxious. Meanwhile, Kim Don was facing his own troubles as he rushed to see his dying father in the hospital. Overcome with anger, he demanded to know why his father had always tormented him in the past. But all his father could do was apologize before passing away. As Kim Don struggled to come to terms with his father's death, Mr. Hu suddenly returned and he asked him why God was putting him through so much pain. Mr. Hu cryptically replied that it was a secret of God's. However, he did reveal that the father Kim Don despised had actually suffered greatly due to the regret of his past sins. In fact, he had given away all his wealth to help needy children. Hearing this surprising revelation, Kim Don stormed out, determined to find his own answers. He ended up drowning his sorrows at a local bar, drinking beer after beer to numb his pain. It wasn't long before Kang-woo showed up, revealing that he knew Kim Don's true identity as an angel. But instead of being intimidated, Kang-woo warned Kim Don that he wouldn't give up on winning Yeon-seo's heart. At that time, Kim Don was puzzled when Kang-woo claimed he could tell if he was an angel. His curiosity took over and he attempted to investigate Kang-woo's home. However, the guards caught Kim Don before he could find anything. Thankfully, Mr. Hu came to his rescue by pretending to be Kang-woo and helped him sneak into his home. While searching, Kim Don stumbled upon a photograph that resembled Yeon-seo. At first, he thought it was her, but upon closer inspection, he realized it wasn't. Soon after, Kang-woo caught Kim Don looking at the photo of his past love. Despite the confrontation, Kim Don fearlessly warned Kang-woo to stay away from Yeon-seo because she was not the woman in the picture. However, Kang-woo remained persistent in his pursuit of Yeon-seo's heart. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo was anxious about Kim Don's arrival. Her worries were put to rest when he appeared and confessed his love for her before kissing her passionately. From then on, they were officially a couple, and their days were filled with happiness and romantic moments. Although Yeon-seo and Kim Don missed their chance to enjoy their moment, they were unaware of Yumi's unexpected arrival. Luckily, they managed to hide their romantic relationship by making excuses. Meanwhile, Mr. Hu remained curious about Kang-woo's past, particularly his grudges and hatred towards God. He decided to investigate by visiting the final resting place of Kang-woo's lost love. It was there that Mr. Hu discovered a handkerchief which identified Kang-woo as an angel. Upon this revelation, Mr. Hu felt sorry for Kang-woo's tragic fate and the suffering he had endured. Eventually, Mr. Hu met with Kang-woo to ask about his current wishes. Kang-woo replied that his only desire was to live freely and escape his past suffering. Elsewhere, Yumi was determined to expose Yeon-ja's criminal activities with Ru-na. She secretly sought the help of a male employee at Yeon-seo's company to gather evidence. However, Ru-na was already aware of Yumi's plans and had ordered her men to eavesdrop on all their conversations. Meanwhile, Kim Don was rehearsing his confession to Yeon-seo about his true identity as an angel and his childhood memories with her. But as he stood in front of her, fear and doubt crept in, and he hesitated to reveal the truth. He was afraid that Yeon-seo might reject him if she found out that he was an angel. To avoid the topic, Kim Don told Yeon-seo about a painful memory from his past. He revealed how he had reconnected with his abusive father shortly before his death, and how he had finally asked him why he treated him so poorly. As Kim Don shared his story, Yeon-seo's heart went out to him, and she embraced him tightly. On the following day, Kang-woo paid a visit to Ru-na with the suspicion that she had bribed ballet dancers to select Ni-na as the lead dancer. Although Ru-na had actually played dirty, she refused to confess and instead threatened Kang-woo to be cautious, warning him that her patience had its limits. Meanwhile, Yumi and her trusted ally Park Gwang-il met with a man who they suspected was the mastermind behind Yeon-seo's accident. The man revealed that Ru-na had ordered him to carry out the heinous act. But unbeknownst to them, Ru-na's henchmen were spying on their conversation, and they reported everything back to Ru-na. Back to Yeon-seo. At that moment, she was determined to become the main dancer in the grand ballet dance event, so she practiced tirelessly to prepare for her best performance. As she gracefully moved to the rhythm, Yumi suddenly appeared and cheered her on, urging her to win the audition. She also asked Yeon-seo to meet her at the police station later that day to report an accident involving Ru-na that happened years ago. Later, Kim Don took Yeon-seo to a secluded place, feeling nervous but excited as he held her hand. There, her eyes sparkled with joy and anticipation. Kim Don then opened up to her, telling a personal story about a time when he feared he might have to disappear due to a grave mistake he had made. But Yeon-seo's words of encouragement gave him hope and courage to keep going. After returning from their little adventure, Yeon-seo resumed her dance practice, twirling and leaping with all her heart. Meanwhile, Kim Don was confronted by Mr. Hu, who warned him to leave Yeon-seo and go to heaven, a place he had longed for. But Kim Don couldn't bear the thought of leaving her behind, and his heart was torn between his love for her and his desire for redemption. Then, Mr. Hu said he believed that Kang-woo was destined to be with Yeon-seo, but Kim Don was deeply in love with her and refused to give up on her. Even though he knew he might end up being eliminated like ashes, he vowed to do anything to be with Yeon-seo. Soon after, Mr. Hu warned him not to go against the will of the gods, but his heart was too stubborn to listen. The next day was the day of the auditions to determine the main dancer, and Yeon-seo was feeling a bit nervous. Sensing her anxiety, Kim Don returned and gave her his handkerchief as a symbol of his unwavering support. As the voting began, Yeon-ja and Ru-na were confident that their plan to make Ni-na the main dancer would succeed, as they had bribed all the other dancers to vote for her. But when the voting was tied between Yeon-seo and Ni-na, their fate was decided by a previous dancer who had also been bribed by Ru-na. However, to everyone's surprise, the dancing girl chose Yeon-seo instead. It turned out that Yeon-seo had shown kindness to her earlier by checking on her when she was sick, and the girl felt that Yeon-seo deserved to be the main dancer. Despite Yeon-seo's aloof exterior, the girl saw a kind-hearted woman beneath the surface. At that moment, Yeon-ja was disappointed that her plan to make Ni-na the main dancer had failed. She feared that Yeon-seo would take back her position as the leader of the company, so she plotted to prevent Yeon-seo from appearing in the grand ballet dance performance. Little did she know that Yeon-seo had a guardian angel in Kim Don, who was determined to protect her at all costs. After winning the main dancer position, Yeon-seo was on her way home when Kang-woo suddenly appeared and asked her out for dinner. But she refused, telling him to keep their interactions strictly professional. However, Kang-woo refused to give up on her and vowed to win her over someday. Meanwhile, being proud of Yeon-seo's victory, Kim Don congratulated her and invited her to go somewhere special. Then, as they arrived at their destination, the skies suddenly darkened and the rain poured down heavily. Shortly after, Kim Don asked Yeon-seo for permission to buy an umbrella, but when he returned, he found that Yeon-seo was nowhere to be found. She had been kidnapped by someone. He was in a panic, calling out Yeon-seo's name after she was kidnapped. Meanwhile, Yumi was waiting for Yeon-seo at the police station to report Ru-na, but received the devastating news that Yeon-seo had been abducted. To make matters worse, the key witness in Ru-na's crime had also been killed by Ru-na herself and couldn't testify against her. In the meantime, Kang-woo received a message from Yeon-seo's phone, claiming that she had decided to end her own life because she couldn't be the main dancer. It was actually a ploy by Ru-na's subordinates to make it seem like Yeon-seo had taken her own life. That night, Yeon-seo was tied up on top of a building by Ru-na's men, ready to be pushed to her death. Ru-na believed her evil plan was finally coming to fruition. But just as Yeon-seo was about to be pushed off the building, Kim Don appeared with his angel wings and swooped in to save her. Yeon-seo was shocked to see his real form and asked who he really was. However, the trauma of the incident caused her to faint and lose consciousness. At that place, Kang-woo witnessed everything but was unable to do anything to stop it. On the other hand, Runa's heart raced as she received news that something strange had happened to Yeon-seo. The man tasked with executing her was certain that he had done his job, yet Yeon-seo had vanished from the spot where she was supposed to have died. Runa couldn't let her plan fail, so she ordered her subordinates to go to Yeon-seo's house and finish the job. But Kim Don was too quick for them and sent Runa's men away. As Runa anxiously waited for an update, Kang-woo suddenly appeared and showed her a message he had received. She tried to play dumb, but Kang-woo began to suspect that Runa was behind the plot to harm Yeon-seo all along. Later, Runa met with her men and ordered them to stay hidden for a few days. However, it was not Runa who appeared the next day, but Mr. Hu, disguised as her. He began meddling in human affairs, just like Kim Don. The following day, Yeon-seo's memory was altered by Mr. Hu, and she no longer remembered the moment when Kim Don had saved her in the form of an angel. Kim Don was relieved that his true identity remained unknown. Meanwhile, Yumi hired a bodyguard for Yeon-seo, fearing a repeat of the previous night's incident. But Yeon-seo refused, confident that having Kim Don nearby was protection enough. Hearing that, Kim Don's face lit up with joy, but at the same time, he felt guilty. He knew that what happened to Yeon-seo was his fault for daring to love a human. On the other hand, Kang-woo presented evidence of what had happened to Yeon-seo to Yeon-ja, who grew uneasy upon realizing that Runa was behind it. There, Kim Don suspected that Yeon-ja was responsible for what Yeon-seo was going through, so he planned to visit her. But before he could, Mr. Hu appeared and whisked him away to a church. There, Kim Don questioned Mr. Hu about why he had been meddling in his affairs with Yeon-seo. Mr. Hu explained that saving her had been a mistake because it was an indirect interference in a human's destiny, which was despised by God. However, Kim Don disagreed and argued that saving Yeon-seo was a good deed that should be praised. But Mr. Hu accused him of acting out of selfishness, only saving someone he cared about. These words hit Kim Don hard, and he realized that he had been acting selfishly all along. The next day, Runa was surprised to see Yeon-seo looking perfectly fine, and this raised suspicions in her mind. She immediately contacted her subordinates to inquire about Yeon-seo's condition, unaware that Yeon-ja was eavesdropping on the conversation. Yeon-ja listened in horror as she realized that her daughter was a dangerous psychopath who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. As Yeon-ja was leaving, she was approached by Kim Don, who tried to warn her. However, Kim Don's attention was suddenly drawn to a man he had been suspicious of for some time. He chased after the man and managed to catch him, convinced that he was the one who had been trying to harm Yeon-seo. There, Kim Don demanded to know who had hired the man, but before he could answer, other workers arrived and separated them. Despite Kim Don's accusations, the other workers vouched for the man's character and Kim Don was forced to apologize and leave. However, he continued to secretly follow the man, still suspicious of his intentions, especially when he saw him meeting with Runa. Then, as soon as Runa returns home, Kim Don confronts her about her involvement in harming Yeon-seo. But she denies everything, insisting that he is imagining things. However, Kim Don sees through her lies and tells her that her pretty face can't hide her ugly soul forever. Soon after, Kim Don shares his suspicions with Yumi, who is puzzled as to why Runa would do such a thing without any apparent gain. Then, he reminds her that not all crimes have a logical motive. Soon after, Yumi receives a call from the police, informing her that the key witness who could expose Runa's wrongdoing has been killed. Yumi is terrified, realizing that Yeon-seo's life is in danger. Suddenly, Kim Don receives a call from Yeon-seo, who asks him to come to her room. When he arrives, he notices that Yeon-seo's expression is different than usual, and she accuses him of not truly loving her and breaking her trust. Kim Don is confused and doesn't understand what's going on. Soon after, Yeon-seo found her lost phone in Kim Don's room and thinks that he lied to her about her accident. Just then, Kang-woo arrives to talk to Kim Don. There, Kim Don tells him that Runa is the one who has been trying to harm Yeon-seo. Hearing that, Kang-woo promises to take revenge on her, but Kim Don warns him not to stoop to her level. Suddenly, Kang-woo reveals that he is no longer an angel and that he no longer follows their rules. This makes Kim Don curious about how he became human and why he is no longer an angel. As the conversation continued, Yeon-seo, still upset, appeared and intentionally invited Kang-woo to go somewhere to make Kim Don jealous. This unexpected behavior left Kim Don feeling frustrated and confused. Yeon-seo's motive for inviting Kang-woo was to find out what really happened during her accident on the roof of the building. Suddenly, Kang-woo shared the message he received and revealed the true story. He even showed a photo of himself with a woman who looked strikingly similar to Yeon-seo. Then, he explained that he has been chasing her because he believes she is that woman, but Yeon-seo denied being the person in the picture. Despite Yeon-seo's denial, Kang-woo persisted in his belief that she was the woman in the photo. He admitted his love for her and expressed his fear of losing her again. Meanwhile, Kim Don was lost in thought, pondering how an angel could become human, when Yeon-seo suddenly called him and asked to meet up. When he arrived, Yeon-seo immediately asked him if he was an angel. It turned out that Yeon-seo's memory of seeing Kim Don's angel wings had returned. Kim Don, who was tired of hiding the truth, confessed that he was indeed an angel. Yeon-seo was surprised by the revelation and left him feeling disappointed because he had been lying to her. Then, he explained that he wanted to tell Yeon-seo the truth, but was afraid she would leave him if she found out. After arriving home, their relationship was a little strained, but Kim Don apologized and tried to convince Yeon-seo. Yeon-seo then asked to be taken to the church where Mr. Hu lived because she wanted to know Kim Don's true duties. Upon arrival, Mr. Hu was scared but eventually revealed that Kim Don's job was to match Yeon-seo with her destined partner. This news made her angry and she went after Kim Don. Elsewhere, Young-ja, who couldn't stand Ru-na's cruelty, finally advised her daughter to stop committing crimes. Despite promising not to do it again, Ru-na continued to deceive them. The next day, Ru-na and her underlings overheard a conversation between Yumi and Gwang-il. However, Yumi, Yeon-seo, and Kim Don already knew about her actions and were determined to reveal her crimes. As the sun began to set, Kim Don approached Kang-woo with a question burning in his heart. He yearned to know how Kang-woo, an angel, could transform into a complete human being. But Kang-woo saw through his true intentions and chose to keep the answer to himself. Despite Kim Don's persistence, Kang-woo advised him once again to give up. In the meantime, Yumi had managed to uncover a statement that proved Ru-na was the mastermind behind Yeon-seo's misfortunes. With this crucial evidence in hand, Yeon-seo marched to Young-ja's house and demanded that Ru-na be fired and sent to the police if Young-ja refused. On the other hand, Kim Don had succeeded in capturing Ru-na's henchmen, and with his incredible strength, he punished them just as they had done to Yeon-seo, tying them to the roof of the building. At that time, Yeon-seo felt at ease, knowing that Kim Don would always protect her. However, her happiness was short-lived when Kang-woo revealed that Kim Don would soon leave her side forever. According to Kang-woo, Kim Don had broken the rules by falling in love with a human and would disappear like dust. Yeon-seo initially refused to believe his words, but when he showed her a handkerchief that belonged to Kim Don, she finally accepted the truth. Now, Yeon-seo was torn between her feelings for Kim Don and the realization that they would soon be forced to part ways forever. Kim Don, unaware that she had discovered his true identity, continued to plead with God to grant him his wish of becoming human. Despite submitting countless reports, each one was met with rejection. Long story short, during Young-ja's resignation meeting, a chain message popped up on everyone's phones. The message was about her husband, Kim Ki-chon, who was responsible for trying to harm Yeon-seo. The news made everyone feel threatened and scared. Meanwhile, Ru-na, in an attempt to make peace, apologized to Yeon-seo. But Yeon-seo saw through her fake apology and knew that Ru-na was up to no good. Then, Ru-na left with a warning, making Yeon-seo uneasy. Despite everything that was happening, Yeon-seo chose to spend time with Kim Don. This behavior was not typical of her, and he noticed it. Then, he went to Kang-woo and asked if he had said something to Yeon-seo. Kang-woo admitted that he had warned her about being with Kim Don. Hearing this, he was furious with Kang-woo. Kim Don's frustration made him continue to pray to the god to become human, even though his requests had always been rejected. He believed that being human would make him complete. Then, as Kim Don continued to pray for his wish to become human, Yeon-seo surprised him by inviting him to a picnic. During their outing, he saved a child from a near accident but ended up with an unusual wound that left a scar instead of healing instantly. This strange occurrence left him wondering if he was finally becoming human. Excited by the possibility of being together, Yeon-seo proposed to Kim Don, asking him to marry her. But Kim Don, still uncertain if he was truly human, declined her offer. To confirm his transformation, they exposed themselves to rainwater, waiting for his angel wings to appear. When they didn't, they knew Kim Don had finally become human. Overjoyed, they shared a romantic night together. However, the next morning, Kim Don woke up unable to touch or feel anything. His body slowly turned transparent and began to disappear. In a panic, he sought answers from Mr. Hu. But it turned out that his wound and disappearance were not signs of becoming human but indications that his time was limited. Confused and heartbroken, he tried to hide his sadness from Yeon-seo by showering her with gifts. Meanwhile, Ru-na was seen conspiring with a man to harm Yeon-seo. The scene shifts back to Yeon-seo, who has a secret that she's been keeping from Kim Don. She knows that he will soon disappear and that their time together is limited. Despite this, she keeps it to herself and tries to make the most of their remaining moments together. One day, while watching Yeon-seo dance on stage, Kim Don suddenly loses sight of her and begins to panic. Mr. Hu arrives and reveals that Yeon-seo's fate is to either disappear or die. At that moment, Kim Don is devastated and decides that he would give up his human form to stay with Yeon-seo for as long as possible. However, Mr. Hu informs him that his existence only delays her fate and that she will still die at the hands of evil people because it's her destiny. Despite this, Kim Don refuses to accept Yeon-seo's fate and continues to make her happy. He even asks her to marry him, which brings her great joy. Kim Don, who had always sought to become human, now reports to God that he will change Yeon-seo's destiny in his own way. In the end, he sacrifices himself, vanishing into dust, to ensure her happiness. The next day, Kim Don decides to come clean with Yeon-seo about his impending disappearance, not wanting to keep any secrets from her. There, she responds by declaring her undying love for him, even if their time together is limited. Their love is forbidden by God, but that doesn't stop them from feeling it deeply. Concerned about Yeon-seo's future, Kim Don turns to her only family, Yumi. But Yumi is hesitant to accept their relationship because of their different social status. This hurts Yeon-seo deeply, and she becomes emotional. However, after seeing Kim Don's sincerity and love for Yeon-seo, Yumi eventually gives them her blessing. As Kim Don and Yeon-seo's love grows, another relationship is developing between Kang-woo and Nina. The following day, Kim Don and Yeon-seo were out shopping for new furnishings for their home as they prepared for their upcoming wedding. Mr. Hu, ever watchful, was following them once again. He had been shadowing them in an attempt to convince Kim Don to stop loving Yeon-seo. According to Mr. Hu, Kim Don's efforts were futile as Yeon-seo's destiny was to die. But Kim Don was not swayed. He told Mr. Hu to stop interfering and let them be. However, Mr. Hu, concerned for Kim Don's safety, decided to tell Yeon-seo about the prophecy so that she would let him go. Knowing that, Kim Don tried to prevent Mr. Hu from speaking to Yeon-seo, and the two got into a fight. Soon after, Yeon-seo arrived and was confused about the altercation. However, Mr. Hu kept trying to speak with her, but Kim Don kept stopping him. Yeon-seo, unaware of the situation, appointed Mr. Hu as the head of their wedding. Hearing that, Mr. Hu was shocked because that was the opposite of what he had hoped to achieve. Feeling overwhelmed, Mr. Hu decided to distance himself from Kim Don and Yeon-seo. Kim Don then sought out Runa to warn her against continuing her crimes against Yeon-seo, telling her that she would later regret it. But she just smiled and admitted that she enjoyed playing her game. Then, Kim Don warned her that he would take direct action against her if she dared to harm Yeon-seo any further. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo visited Kang-woo to give him a wedding invitation. There, he warned her that their happiness would only be fleeting, but Yeon-seo was determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead with Kim Don by her side. Kang-woo then revealed that if Yeon-seo continued to be with Kim Don, she would face the same fate he once did, which was death, as a punishment for breaking the rules. If that happened, Kim Don would suffer great pain from losing her. Hearing that, Yeon-seo was terrified that Kim Don would suffer because of her, so she turned to Mr. Hu for a solution. She was willing to sacrifice anything for Kim Don's happiness. However, Mr. Hu was resigned to their fate, knowing that losing one of them was part of the punishment the gods had inflicted upon them. It turned out that Yeon-seo was supposed to have died a long time ago, and now she must choose between Kim Don, who is missing, and Mr. Hu, who is present. At that time, she was determined to save Kim Don at any cost, and Kim Don felt the same way. To prepare for his wedding to Yeon-seo, Kim Don visited her deceased parents to ask for their blessing. He also apologized for not being able to be with Yeon-seo for a long time. This made her cry, but they tried to savor the moment before their separation. Meanwhile, Runa, who was still plotting against Yeon-seo, went to meet a man in an empty building. Kim Don noticed this and followed her men, ultimately bringing them to Kang-woo. However, it turned out that the men were just following orders and didn't know the true intent of their actions. Then, Kim Don promised to take care of the situation himself. At that moment, Kang-woo was surprised by Kim Don's actions, as they would only make him hate God even more. But Kim Don didn't care, as he had become a rebel angel and was used to disobeying God's orders. Finally, the day of Yeon-seo and Kim Don's wedding finally arrived. Mr. Hu visited Kim Don before the ceremony with a cake as a gift. There, Kim Don was moved by this kind gesture, as Mr. Hu had previously disapproved of their marriage. He realized that Mr. Hu only wanted what was best for him. During the wedding ceremony, the paper with their vows caught fire, seemingly indicating that God did not approve of their union. After the wedding, Kim Don asked Yeon-seo for permission to leave. However, she reluctantly agreed, not knowing that Kim Don's mission was to confront Runa and put an end to her harmful actions. Meanwhile, Yeon-seo went to church to make a sacrifice so that Kim Don could live. Soon after, Kim Don confronted Runa and attempted to strangle her, but her men attacked him. In the ensuing fight, Kim Don was injured, and Mr. Hu came to help him. However, Mr. Hu broke the angelic rule against killing humans by accidentally causing Runa's men to die. As a consequence, he was reduced to dust. The scene shifts to Runa, who's in a state of panic upon learning about her subordinates' deaths. Just then, she receives a call from Nina, who asks her to meet up. Little did Runa know that Nina had an ulterior motive that to frame her and turn her over to the authorities. After Runa's arrest, the authorities searched her room and office. Yeon-ja feels guilty, realizing that Runa's obsession with becoming the owner of Yeon-seo's company might have led her down this path. Meanwhile, Kim Don and Yeon-seo learn about Runa's arrest, feeling relieved that there are no more threats to their safety. However, Kang-woo soon appears, urging Yeon-seo to resume practice for the grand ballet dance event. Initially, Yeon-seo declines as she wants to spend her remaining time with Kim Don. But Kang-woo insists that if he performs the ballet, there might be a miracle that could save Kim Don's life. Kang-woo's conviction stems from Mr. Hu's visit to him before disappearing. According to Mr. Hu, Yeon-seo would make a sacrifice for Kim Don, and he asks Kang-woo to stop her. By helping her, Kang-woo hopes to find peace and release himself from the suffering he's been enduring. In the evening, Kim-don takes Yeon-seo to the place where they first met. He asks Yeon-seo to perform a dance from his childhood during the grand dance stage. The dance holds a special meaning for Kim-don, and he wants to see it one last time. Yeon-seo feels sad because she doesn't want the dance to be the end for Kim-don. Meanwhile, Runa, who's in prison, attempts to end her own life and is rushed to the hospital. However, during the grand ballet dance event, she manages to escape and heads to the dance studio to seek revenge against Kim-don. She meets Nina and shares her plan to make Yeon-seo suffer. Nina tries to stop her, but Runa is consumed by hatred and revenge, and she heads straight for Kim-don. Then, when Kim-don sat enraptured by Yeon-seo's magnificent performance, a sudden phone call from Nina shattered the moment. It seemed that Runa, the wicked antagonist, was lurking in the shadows, waiting to harm Kim-don. Runa had purposely informed Nina of her nefarious plan, knowing that she would spill the beans to Kim-don, luring him into her trap. Unaware of the danger lurking behind him, Kim-don ventured out, but Yeon-seo spotted Runa following him. Meanwhile, the ballet recital reached its climax, with Yeon-seo dazzling the audience with her graceful moves. But Kim-don was preoccupied with finding Runa and putting an end to her evil scheme. Eventually, he located her and called the police to apprehend her. However, Runa seemed pleased with herself, claiming that she had succeeded in carrying out her plan. Bewildered, Kim-don rushed to Yeon-seo, who was dancing with all her might, despite the excruciating pain she was experiencing. Unbeknownst to Kim-don, Runa had stabbed Yeon-seo before the show began. There, Kim-don held Yeon-seo, who was slipping away, while she apologized for her fate. They rushed her to the emergency room, but her condition was critical. Kim-don couldn't help but remember his mentor's words that Yeon-seo was destined to fall prey to evil forces. He then gave his handkerchief to Kang-woo, admitting that he may not be able to witness Yeon-seo's recovery. However, Kang-woo refused to help Kim-don and insisted that he face his challenge alone. Then, Kim-don prayed to God with all his might, willing to risk his life to save Yeon-seo. Finally, his prayers were answered, and Yeon-seo made a miraculous recovery. But as she got better, Kim-don began to fade away until he vanished completely. In the end, Yeon-seo survived her critical condition, but she remained unconscious. Soon after, Kang-woo gave Kim-don's handkerchief to her and urged her to wake up and honor his sacrifice. Suddenly, Yumi arrived and told Kang-woo to go home to prepare for the ballet show, which had been postponed. Then, Kang-woo moved on from Yeon-seo and appointed Nina as the lead dancer. He encouraged the other dancers to perform their best as a tribute to Yeon-seo, who remained in a coma. Meanwhile, Young-ja and her husband tried to visit Yeon-seo, but Yumi initially refused. However, she felt remorse when she learned that Kim-don had visited her before and urged her to repent for her wrongdoing. On the other hand, Runa, who was in prison, initially felt happy when she found out that Nina had become the lead dancer. However, her happiness turned to frustration when Nina announced her retirement, making Runa's efforts to make her sister the star dancer go to waste. Months passed, and Yeon-seo remained in a coma despite everyone's efforts to wake her up. Then, Kang-woo returned to check on her and discovered that the mark on the handkerchief Kim-don gave him had not turned black, indicating that Kim-don had not entirely disappeared. It turned out Kim-don was actually in Yeon-seo's dream, where she lived a happy life with him, oblivious to the fact that she was still in a coma. Eventually, he bid farewell to her and urged her to move on with her life without worrying about him. Then, he explained that God had not taken him away but had brought him to heaven because he had fulfilled his mission. After all of this, Kim-don's sins were forgiven thanks to Mr. Hu's sincere request. Upon hearing this, Yeon-seo woke up from her coma, and the mark on Kim-don's handkerchief turned black, a sign that he had completely left her. At that time, she wept at the sacrifices Kim-don had made for her. 3 months passed, and Yeon-seo worked hard to become a successful company leader with Kang-woo by her side. She managed to grow the ballet company, but she still felt the pain of losing Kim-don. There, Kang-woo encouraged her to move on, but Yeon-seo still believed that Kim-don would return someday. One day, Yeon-seo became angry with her servants because Kim-don's handkerchief was missing. She offered a 200% raise bonus if they found it. Yumi noticed that Yeon-seo's mental condition was deteriorating and called a psychiatrist. At that time, Yeon-seo kept hallucinating and believed that Kim-don was still around. Finally, Yumi found a box of letters that Kim-don had written to Yeon-seo, which helped her find closure and move on from her grief. At that moment, Yeon-seo was in tears as she wondered where Kim-don was. She missed him terribly and wished he were with her. But unknown to her, Kim-don was actually nearby, taking the form of an angel. Although others couldn't see him, she caught glimpses of him from time to time. Meanwhile, Kang-woo was secretly watching Nina as she taught ballet to children. On the other hand, Kim-don followed Yeon-seo in secret until they arrived at the park where they first met. Yeon-seo, unaware of his presence, kept asking to see Kim-don again. She wrote a wish on a leaf, hoping that it would come true. Yeon-seo had tried to make the wish come true countless times before, but to no avail. She gave up and cried, but then, out of nowhere, she could sense Kim-don's presence. This surprised him, and Yeon-seo was overjoyed. It turned out that Kim-don had become human, as indicated by his disappearing handkerchief. There, Yeon-seo hugged him tightly, filled with happiness. The series ends. The moral lesson of this script is don't anger an angel, or they might fall in love with you and have to become human to complete their mission.